In some good news, the children in the country now may get vaccinated against COVID-19 with Covaxin getting emergency approval from a government panel, from an expert panel for children aged 2 till 18. How effective is the vaccine going to be? Do children really need it? And what does it mean going forward? To explain all that, we have with us Moahana Basu, who, as you know, tracks science, who tracks COVID for ThePrint, and she's going to help answer some of my questions and some of your questions. So do start sending them in this episode of Government Matters. So Moahana, what is this development? As I said, it sounds like great news.
Yes, it is. So there has been, a little bit of a clarification that came in from the Health Ministry, which is that basically what has happened is that there is an subject expert committee which recommends and which reviews the data from clinical trials, and they have given a positive response. They have given a go-ahead with some restrictions and some other recommendations. And usually it is thought that if they give a go-ahead, then the next step is that the DCGI will approve the vaccine. So far we do not have the nod from DCGI, but it looks like the committee has recommended that it can go ahead for market approval.
Right. So what are the next steps, Moahana, now that this committee has given a go-ahead? When does it, sort of reach the DCGI? When does the next final decision taken?
So that's what we don't have clarity on how long it might now take for the DCGI to approve it. So far it's not there, but that is what we can expect to happen soon. Once that comes, then it can get into the market. But that is the thing that we are waiting for right now. So it's a go-ahead from the subject expert committee, and once the DCGI the DCGI basically has to take a call on whether or not to give the nod now.
Right. So Moahana, there were clinical trials that were conducted based on which there has been, as you said, the expert panel has given a go-ahead. Can you tell us something about the findings? Can you tell us how effective this was found to be?
So we don't. So basically, what has happened right now is the phase 2/3 trials. So it's to look at the safety and to sort of determine what is the safe dosage. So we won't have the efficacy results at this point among children. So what we will have is what is the recommended dose in children. So for now, from what we hear, it's the same as adults, but what they are recommending is that instead of using those vials which have multiple doses, the children's vaccine will probably come in a pre-filled syringe that will allow the vaccine dosage to be accurate, and so that there is no variation in the. Otherwise, the vaccine is the same. So what we will get right now is the dosage. Efficacy will still take more time. So as I said, among the recommendations that the subject expert committee has made is that the trial continue, so that once we have more participants, more volunteers, we will have larger data on how effective the vaccine is to prevent symptomatic COVID.
Right. But Moahana, to try and understand from a layperson perspective, children so far haven't, the impact of COVID hasn't been much. Now, of course, there was talk of a potential third wave and how that can impact children, but that's yet to be seen. We don't know. The problem perhaps was that children can become carriers.
Yes.
Will the vaccine help on that front, because it does not necessarily reduce transmissibility to such an extent?
Right. So far you're right. We had very little data on whether vaccines can reduce the transmission of the spread of the virus, but there is some emerging data now. I have done a story just a few days back on some preliminary data showing that vaccines do to some extent reduce the transmissibility of the virus. But again, that is something that needs to be seen. But we cannot completely dismiss the effect that it had on children, because during the second wave, when we saw numbers increasing a lot, it did affect a significant number of children. And so it's just, if there is a viable vaccine for them, it is preventing avoidable deaths.
Right.
It's just as simple as that. Even if the numbers are low, we will end up saving more lives.
Right.
And as far as transmission is concerned, there is preliminary data right now showing that it can be reduced.
Right, especially with schools opening up, it's very important for children to be inoculated.
Right. Also, another thing is that when a child is a host, the virus is still multiplying inside them, which means that it has chance to mutate. And new variants to emerge. So we don't have data to say that that's what happened so far.
Right.
But that is definitely a possibility. So it will help to ensure that the disease gets stopped in its tracks every time it finds a new host.
All right. Okay, let's take this question from this handle called IJR009 Pranav. When can we expect full-scale vaccination for children now that the vaccination for adults is on track? So is that still a long way to go?
I'm not sure about what long way is here, because we definitely have seen vaccines being approved much faster
Right.
than it ever has. So, like I said, that this is still phase 2, the data that has been collected so far. We still will need to wait for the efficacy data for it to get full scale, approval. And even for the vaccines in adults, we still do not have the phase 3 trial results have not been peer reviewed, and they're not in a peer reviewed journal yet. But I think at this point, it's more about just making sure that whatever is the best candidate available reaches the most number of people, so that the harm is minimized. Basically.
Okay, this question is from sub 80. When would we reach 80% and 90% of adult being double vaccinated?
That is again that is not something that I can really predict, right? We have had a lot of supply issues, and there definitely has been a lot more scaling up in the last month, and we had those days when we saw vaccination crossing 1 crore a day. So it's all about
the pace,
about basically the supply chains, and it has very little to do with, it's the production capacity and how that can be, it's not something that we can determine at this stage.
Right, okay. This is from Nipun. Are there any other vaccines that are safe and allowed for children?
So right now in India we have the Zydus Cadila vaccine, Zy-Cov-D, which is the world's first DNA-based vaccine. So that is approved for children above 12, and but that's what here it's 2 to 18. That's the age group that it has been tested in. So this is still above 12 years. So so that makes Bharat Biotech's if once it gets its approval, it will be one of the first.
But internationally, globally, are there other
internationally, we have Moderna that has been, even Pfizer it's getting, approved in US. It has got approval for children above 12, if I'm not wrong. And so again, these are there are very few right now, and the trials are still ongoing on this.
All right, Surinder Arunachalam, do the kids need vaccines? How many kids actually got COVID? How many were admitted to hospitals? How many died? Why are we not talking about natural immunity for kids who've had COVID already?
So again, we saw that the natural immunity conversation or that line of thought did not really work out, right? If that were to be true, we would not have seen that scale of the second wave that we saw, and with the Delta, with the fact that the virus is constantly mutating, we cannot rely on just the natural immunity, because basically the virus's evolution is based on the fact that it will try to evade whatever defense our body is making. So that is what we are fighting. That is what we're trying to beat the virus there. So it did not work in adults to base it or to rely on just natural immunity. So the same thing applies for children, and we don't yet know what are the long-term effects of it. Even if the numbers are low in children, we do not really know if an infection will lead to serious disorders later in life. We don't know that. So if the vaccine is safe, then I think that is the more prudent way to go.
All right. Okay, this is a question from Janardhan, who's a member of the Print YouTube community. We've heard that Sputnik is being underutilized. How can we plan out a strategy to vaccinate children? So is Sputnik being underutilized? Is there?
I think again it's a supply and it's a supply issue. Like we definitely have the major vaccine that is being used in India is Covishield. So because their production is much larger, so it's a supply issue, and because I mean these are the two vaccines that have been there right from the beginning. There's already a chain established. There are the production is being scaled up for these two, which is why the uptake is more for this. And I think over time, as more and more vaccines come into the market, and other countries and also start getting vaccinated more,
right,
we will have more supply at our disposal. So I think that's again it's a supply issue.
Okay, Akash Singla, we've recently seen a drop in weekly vaccination rates. Is it because of decreasing first dose takers? If yes, should the government now decrease dose gaps so that more people are eligible for the second dose?
So this definitely is something that the government needs to take stock of, that the gap was increased at one point because of the supply issues, and if we do have enough doses available, so should the gap be reduced again? But then there were studies that pointed towards a larger gap being beneficial, because the antibodies are sort of waning after a period of 3 months. So so I think at this point it just seems like the scientific consensus is that this is the gap that is working. So I think that is why that call is not being taken.
Okay, again a question from Sub 80. While no other major countries are planning vaccines for under 4, I assume the age of 4, what was the thought process in including 2 to 4 in the vaccine coverage? Is there any risk involved that India is discounting?
Again, so that exactly is the point of the clinical trials, right? So if the first part, that is what phase 2 and phase 3 have been combined here. So if phase 2 has been done, basically that means that that is what they try to evaluate. Is there an age group where it's not working? So this trial was also divided in terms of the ages. Okay, so there was like a separate analysis for those under from that in that age group. So that is what we will learn once Bharat Biotech or the DCGI actually publishes the entire data. So that data we still don't have, but that is the data based on which this go ahead has happened. So we would assume that there were no issues with the safety with this vaccine for children.
Right. So Mona, just before we end, again from a layperson perspective, to understand what is the difference in terms of the vaccine usage for children and for adults, because like you mentioned, the vaccine will remain the same as far as Covaxin is concerned. It's just the dosage that will perhaps be different.
No, dosage is also so the reason that this had to be done into, like, you go for trials in adults first, and once the safety and efficacy is established there, that is when you go and check it for children. And you need to do that because a vaccine that is effective in adults may cause like a very high fever in children.
Okay.
So things like that to check for the kind of adverse events that children may be facing. And second, the age group is when your immune system is still developing. You still have antibodies that you've gotten from your mother. So there are times when the vaccine is not as effective in children as it is in adults. Right. So these are the things that you need to
keep in mind.
Basically check during trials in adults in children, and so that is exactly what is happening.
Right, all right. So as we said at the beginning of this conversation, it's some good news coming in. Of course, there is no clarity yet on how long it would take to actually roll Covaxin out for children. But at least one hurdle has been crossed, so it seems like we're on the right track. Thank you, Moahana, for explaining this to us and also breaking down the science behind it. Thank you very much for watching Government Matters and for sending in your questions. Keep subscribing to the Print YouTube channel.